The case of Maina Ramulu. Story of Maina Ramulu is one of deep-seated trauma, calculated violence, and systemic failures that enabled his repeated offenses over 2 decades. Known as one of India's most infamous serial killers, he targeted vulnerable women in Telangana, killing at least 16 to 18 individuals between 2003 and 2020. Early life and background. Maina Ramulu was born in 1976 in Upla village, Telangana, India, into a modest family. He worked as a stonecutter, earning a minimal livelihood. His life took a drastic turn at the age of 21 when his arranged marriage ended in betrayal. Shortly after his wedding, Ramulu's wife eloped with another man, leaving him emotionally devastated. This incident left him harboring deep resentment and anger toward women. This emotional scar, compounded by his lack of education and social support, pushed Ramulu into isolation. His hatred for women became the root cause of his future crimes, and he began channeling his personal trauma into acts of violence. His first criminal activity, in 2003 to 2009, Maina Ramulu began his killings in Hyderabad. In 2003, focusing on women he met at toddy shops, which are informal establishments serving alcoholic beverages. He followed a consistent modus operandi. Ramulu would frequent toddy shops and specifically look for women drinking alone. These women, often from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, were vulnerable and unlikely to report minor conflicts or theft. He befriended his victims by initiating conversations and sometimes drinking with them. His calm demeanor helped him gain their trust. Once the women were intoxicated and the surroundings deserted, Ramulu would strangle them with their saris or other pieces of clothing. He relied on this method to ensure silence and avoid attracting attention. After killing his victims, he would steal their valuables, such as gold jewelry or cash, and dispose of their bodies in secluded areas. The stolen items were later sold to fund his daily needs and toddy shop visits. By 2009, he had murdered 9 women. His crimes drew police attention due to the recurring nature of the murders and the similarities in the victims' profiles. He was arrested on October 14, 2009, and sentenced to life imprisonment on February 21, 2011. His second murder, in 2012 to 2013, while undergoing treatment for psychological issues in a psychiatric hospital in December 2011, Ramulu managed to escape, along with 5 other inmates. Over the next 2 years, he resumed his murderous activities. During this spree, he killed 5 women in areas such as Bhawanpalli, Chandanagar, and Dundigal. His modus operandi remained consistent, relying on toddy shops as hunting grounds and strangulation as his method of murder. Ramulu was rearrested on May 13, 2013, and sent back to prison. Third murder spree, in 2018. In 2018, Ramulu appealed to the Telangana High Court, seeking release from his life sentence. The court granted his appeal, and he was released on bail. However, his freedom was short-lived as he returned to killing shortly after his release. During this period, he killed 2 women in Shamirpet and Patancheru, using the same modus operandi. He was apprehended later in 2018 and sent back to prison. Fourth murder spree in 2020. Despite his previous convictions and the repeated pattern of his crimes, Ramulu was released again on July 31, 2020. Within months, he committed 2 more murders. In December 2020, 2 women were killed under circumstances identical to his previous crimes. CCTV footage placed him with the victims shortly before their deaths, providing clear evidence of his involvement. Ramulu was finally arrested on January 26, 2021, marking the end of his violent spree. There was few challenges in investigation. Many of Ramulu's victims came from marginalized communities, making their disappearances less likely to be reported immediately. The lack of forensic evidence and the isolated nature of his crimes initially hindered police efforts to establish a clear connection between the murders. When we check the breakthrough, Indian police began noticing patterns in the murders. One is the use of toddy shops as hunting grounds, and strangulation with saris, then the theft of valuables from victims, and also witness accounts and CCTV footage from later murders provided critical leads. Items stolen from victims were also traced back to Ramulu, directly implicating him in several crimes. How it explain in psychological profile Maina Ramulu's actions are a result of deeply rooted psychological issues, exacerbated by his personal trauma and societal neglect. Main pop-up reason is betrayal and hatred. The abandonment by his wife left Ramulu with a pathological hatred toward women. He saw his victims not as individuals, but as representations of his perceived betrayal, turning his crimes into acts of misplaced retribution and need for power and control. His modus operandi luring, gaining trust, and killing demonstrates a need to assert dominance and control over his victims, especially the psychopathic tendencies. Ramulu exhibited traits of psychopathy, including a lack of remorse for his actions, manipulative behavior, and an ability to blend into society despite his violent tendencies. Also repetition and compulsion. The consistent nature of his crimes suggests a compulsion to relive his violent fantasies. Even after imprisonment, he resumed killing upon release, indicating an uncontrollable drive and lack of rehabilitation. Despite his evident psychological issues, there were no effective interventions during his prison sentences. His repeated escapes and releases allowed him to continue his crimes unchecked. Examples of exposing the failures of the justice system. Ramulu's case highlights significant lapses in the criminal justice system. Escapes. His escape from a psychiatric hospital in 2011 allowed him to resume his crimes. Premature releases. Despite his history of violence, Ramulu was released multiple times on bail, leading to further murders. Lack of monitoring. There was insufficient oversight of Ramulu's activities after his release, which could have prevented subsequent killings. Impact and legacy. 1. Awareness of vulnerability. Ramulu's crimes underscored the vulnerability of marginalized women in rural and urban areas, emphasizing the need for greater protections. 2. Call for reforms. His repeated offenses highlighted the need for stricter policies regarding high-risk offenders and improved psychological evaluations before release. 3. Psychological studies. Ramulu's case provides valuable insights into the psychological motivations of serial killers, particularly those driven by personal trauma and societal neglect. In conclusion, Maina Ramulu's story is a grim reminder of how personal trauma, unchecked psychological issues, and systemic failures can converge to create a serial killer. His actions devastated the lives of numerous families and highlighted the vulnerabilities in both society and the criminal justice system. Understanding his case is crucial to preventing similar tragedies in the future. Thank you. Have a nice day.